Blind black girl mocked by famous violinist. Then she played and shocked everyone. The late May sunlight cascaded through the grand windows of the Metropolitan Hall, bathing the polished marble floors in golden hues. Staff members scurried about, arranging crystal centerpieces and adjusting floral arrangements with practiced precision. In just 7 hours, New York's elite would flood these halls for the annual Bridging Harmony Charity Gala, the most prestigious music education fundraiser of the season. Sebastian Corwin stood center stage, one hand resting on his Stradivarius case, the other adjusting his tailored Armani jacket. At 43, he commanded the classical music world with technical brilliance and calculated charm, brought in more money than he could reasonably spend. What the public didn't see was the ruthless ambition that had propelled him to these heights. The lighting needs to be adjusted 3 degrees warmer when I perform, Sebastian instructed the tech director. And ensure the harmonics don't get lost in the back rows. The acoustics in this hall are temperamental at best. He spoke with the casual authority of someone accustomed to having his every whim fulfilled. Across the stage, Harmony Fields guided her student through the space with gentle directions. At 36, Ms. Fields had abandoned her own promising career at Juilliard to teach music in underfunded public schools. Her student, 13-year-old Zariah Coleman, moved with careful steps, her right hand lightly touching the sleeve of her teacher's blouse. The stage extends about 10 feet further, then drops off, Ms. Fields explained. There will be stairs to your right when you exit. 5 steps down. Zariah nodded, committing the dimensions to memory. Born blind, she had developed an extraordinary spatial awareness and an even more remarkable ear. Her fingers moved slightly at her sides, as if playing invisible keys, memorizing the distances that would matter later. Ms. Fields, called the event coordinator, a hairy woman with a clipboard and 3 different communication devices. We need to go over the program order. There's been a slight change. As her teacher stepped away, Zariah stood motionless, her head tilted slightly. She was listening to the room, the echo patterns, the subtle air currents, the whispered conversations in far corners. This was how she built her mental map of unfamiliar spaces. Sebastian, noticing the girl for the first time, frowned. Who is that? He asked his assistant, a nervous young man named Parker. Zariah Coleman. She's the recipient of the Inner City Music Initiative Scholarship. She'll be performing 3rd in the student showcase. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. She's blind. Yes, sir. And quite talented, according to. Is this a pity concert now? Sebastian's voice dripped with disdain, loud enough for nearby staff to hear. A few technicians exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one spoke up. Parker shifted uneasily. The selection committee was quite impressed with her audition tape. They said her interpretation of Mendelssohn was remarkably. Yes, Sebastian waved away the explanation. Everyone loves an inspirational story. Blind girl plays violin, audience cries, donations flow. He watched as Zariah turned her head toward their conversation, her expression unreadable behind dark glasses. Later, during the rehearsal break, Sebastian cornered the event coordinator. Tell me about this Coleman girl, he demanded, voice lowered. What's her background? Public school in the Bronx. No formal conservatory training, just her school program and weekend classes at a community center. But her teacher believes she has exceptional potential. Potential, Sebastian repeated with a thin smile. How heartwarming. As the coordinator walked away, Sebastian noticed an elderly violin technician organizing instruments for the evening performances. A plan began to form, subtle, easily dismissed as a misunderstanding if questioned. You there? He called to the technician. I want to make a small adjustment to tonight's program. A little surprise for our special guest. The technician looked up, uncertain. Sir? Sebastian lowered his voice, casual charm replacing his earlier sharpness. The blind girl, let's give her an appropriate challenge. Something with character. His eyes fell on a weathered violin case tucked among the technician's supplies. That old instrument there, is it playable? Barely, Mr. Corwin. It needs significant repair. The bridge is compromised, and the strings are perfect. When it's Coleman's turn to perform, I'll announce a special opportunity. We'll present her with this violin instead of her own. Call it a test of true musical intuition." Sebastian's smile didn't reach his eyes. "A little drama for our generous donors. But sir, that wouldn't be fair. No one could play well on an instrument in that condition." Sebastian's expression hardened. "Fairness is subjective. The real world doesn't give special accommodations. If she's genuinely talented, she'll manage. If not," he shrugged. "The truth reveals itself." As afternoon faded into evening, the hall transformed. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, champagne flowed freely, and the city's wealthiest patrons arrived in designer finery. Cameras flashed as Sebastian greeted influential guests with practiced warmth. Backstage, Zariah sat alone, fingers tracing the polished wood of her violin. Unlike Sebastian's instrument, hers wasn't valuable, just a decent student model her school had provided. But in her hands, it sang with unusual clarity. "You ready, Zariah?" Ms. Fields asked, returning from a final program check. "I can feel the vibrations through the floor," Zariah replied quietly. "There are many people out there." Ms. Fields squeezed her shoulder. "Just play like you did in our classroom. That's all that matters." Neither of them knew what Sebastian had arranged. Neither could have guessed how this night would unravel a decades-old secret, or how a single performance would upend the classical music world's carefully maintained hierarchies. By midnight, nothing would be the same. Applause rippled through the Metropolitan Hall as the second student performer, a reed-thin boy from Juilliard's pre-college program, completed his technically flawless rendition of Paganini. Sebastian Corwin stepped forward, his Italian leather shoes gleaming under the stage lights. The audience hushed instantly. "Magnificent, truly magnificent," Sebastian proclaimed, his voice carrying effortlessly to the farthest corners of the hall. His practiced smile revealed perfect teeth as cameras flashed from the press section. "This is precisely the level of excellence our elite institutions foster." He paused dramatically, scanning the audience of wealthy donors, industry power brokers, and social elites. 300 people hung on his every word. "But tonight is about bridging divides, is it not? About recognizing potential wherever it may be found." Something shifted in his tone, almost imperceptible, but carrying a hint of mockery. "Our next performer represents our outreach to the city's public school system. Please welcome Miss Zariah Coleman." From stage left, Zariah appeared, guided by Ms. Fields, who discreetly whispered final directions before retreating into the wings. Zariah moved with surprising grace, her simple black dress modest compared to the designer outfits in the audience. She carried her violin case close to her body, like armor. Sebastian watched her approach, then made his move. Wait, he called out, his voice booming with theatrical enthusiasm. "I have a special surprise for tonight's event." The audience stirred with interest. Zariah stopped, her head tilted in confusion. "Miss Coleman," Sebastian continued, approaching her with exaggerated steps that drew chuckles from the audience, apparently forgetting she couldn't see his theatrical movements. "Tonight is about opportunity, about stretching beyond comfort zones." He gestured to an assistant who hurried forward carrying an aged wooden case. The assistant opened it, revealing a violin that looked more like a museum piece than a performance instrument. Its varnish was dull, its wood showing fine cracks along the body. Several audience members murmured in confusion. "This," Sebastian announced, "is a rare opportunity. An instrument with history, with character." He removed Zariah's violin case from her hands, passing it to another assistant. "Tonight I invite you to play on this special violin. It has, shall we say, a mysterious spirit. A challenge worthy of true talent." Ms. Fields started forward from the wings, alarm visible on her face, but was blocked by stage crew who didn't understand the situation. Meanwhile, a wireless microphone picked up Sebastian's whisper to a front-row donor. "Let's see what vibrations guide her now." The comment broadcast clearly through the hall's sound system. Uncomfortable gasps mixed with a few nervous laughs. The event coordinator frantically signaled the sound technician, who broke the microphone, but the damage was done. Zoraya stood frozen, her face a careful mask. Her fingers extended hesitantly toward the offered instrument. When they made contact, they traced the body carefully, discovering the imperfections immediately: the warped fingerboard, the compromised bridge, the uneven strings that would never hold proper tuning. I usually play my own instrument," she said softly, her voice barely audible. Sebastian's smile widened. But a true musician can coax music from any instrument, can they not? Or perhaps this challenge is too advanced for a... He paused meaningfully. Beginner program. The subtle cruelty wasn't lost on everyone. A prominent music critic frowned, making notes. A renowned cellist in the third row shifted uncomfortably. But no one intervened. "I'll try," Zoraya said simply. A hush fell over the crowd. Sebastian retreated to a prime viewing position, arms folded, a satisfied smirk playing at his lips. He exchanged knowing glances with several conservatory directors. Zoraya positioned the violin under her chin, adjusting her grip on the unfamiliar instrument. Her first exploratory note rang out, painfully off-key, strained through the damaged bridge. Someone in the back laughed. Then another. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Ms. Fields watched in horror from the wings, tears forming in her eyes. The event coordinator beside her muttered, "This is cruel. Someone should stop it." Zoraya's second note wobbled, even worse than the first. Sebastian's shoulders shook with suppressed laughter. The sound system, reactivated for the performance, caught his murmur to a colleague. "As expected. Style over substance." But then something shifted. Zoraya's posture straightened. Her fingers adjusted their pressure on the strings with microscopic precision. She repositioned the instrument, finding the exact spot where the compromised bridge could still function. Her next note emerged clear and haunting. The smattering of laughter died instantly. Zoraya tilted her head, as if listening to something beyond the hall, beyond the moment. Her fingers began to move in patterns that seemed to defy the instrument's limitations. The melody that emerged was unlike anything most had ever heard, ancient and new simultaneously, complex yet profoundly accessible. Sebastian's smug expression faltered. He leaned forward, brow furrowed in confusion. The piece built slowly, gathering emotional intensity with each measure. It wasn't a standard recital piece, not Mozart, not Tchaikovsky, not any recognized competition standard. This was something else entirely. By the second minute, not a breath could be heard in the hall. By the third, several audience members were openly weeping. The haunting melody seemed to speak directly to each person, bypassing intellectual assessment and striking emotional chords many didn't know they possessed. Even Ms. Fields looked stunned. This wasn't the piece they had rehearsed. Sebastian's face had drained of color. His eyes were fixed on Zoraya's fingers, on their impossible dance across the damaged strings. Recognition flickered in his expression, not just of extraordinary talent, but of something more specific, more personal. As the final notes faded into silence, the audience remained motionless, collectively holding their breath. Zoraya lowered the violin slowly. In the absolute silence that followed, she spoke 5 quiet words that only those in the front row could hear. This was called Lament of the Unheard. Then the applause began, tentative at first, then building into a thunderous, standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hall. The ovation continued for nearly 5 minutes. Wealthy patrons who typically offered polite, measured applause were on their feet, some shouting, "Brava!" through tears. Photographers surged forward, their flashes illuminating Zoraya's calm face as she stood, violin still in hand, accepting the response with quiet dignity. Sebastian Corwin had retreated to the side of the stage, his complexion ashen. The event coordinator approached him, expecting instructions for the next segment, but he waved her away irritably. His eyes never left the old violin in Zoraya's hands. "Mr. Corwin? We need to continue with the program," the coordinator insisted. "Yes, fine. Just give me a moment." His voice had lost its commanding resonance. As Zariah was guided from the stage by Ms. Fields, Sebastian moved toward them with forced casualness. "Quite unexpected," he said, attempting to regain his composure. "That piece, what did you call it?" "Lament of the Unheard," Zariah repeated. "By Augustus Bell." The name hung in the air between them. Ms. Fields looked puzzled, but Sebastian's reaction was unmistakable, a sharp intake of breath, fingers tightening around his program until the paper crumpled. "Impossible," he muttered. "That composition was never published. It was only a sketch," Zariah finished. "Found among my grandfather's personal effects." The backstage area had gone quiet, the stagehands and other performers sensing the tension crackling between them. Sebastian studied Zariah's face, searching for deception but finding none behind her dark glasses. "Your grandfather?" His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "Augustus Bell," she confirmed. "I only learned about him 3 months ago. My mother never spoke of him." Ms. Fields looked between them, confusion evident. "Zariah, you never mentioned." "It was in the box of materials the school archivist found," Zariah explained, turning toward her teacher's voice. "Remember the old storage room cleanup? They found sheet music and letters addressed to Augustus Bell. My mother confirmed he was my grandfather when I asked." Sebastian's eyes narrowed. "And this sudden connection inspired tonight's performance?" "The violin told me," Zariah said simply. A flash of irritation crossed Sebastian's face. "That's absurd. The violin is just a damaged old instrument I had the technician pull from storage." Zariah's fingers moved across the violin's body again, this time tracing along the bottom edge of the back panel. "There's a carving here. A tiny bell symbol with the initials AB." The color drained further from Sebastian's face. With uncharacteristic abruptness, he reached for the instrument. "Let me see that." Ms. Fields stepped between them protectively. "I think that's enough, Mr. Corwin. Zariah needs to rest." But a distinguished older man with silver hair had approached their group, drawn by the exchange. "I couldn't help overhearing," he said, his British accent precise and cultured. "Did you say Augustus Bell? The violin maker?" Sebastian turned sharply. "Dr. Whitmore. I wasn't aware you were attending tonight. Last-minute invitation," Dr. Whitmore replied, his eyes moving from Sebastian to Zariah. "I'm the curator for the string instrument collection at the Metropolitan Museum. And I believe I just witnessed something extraordinary." He extended his hand toward Zariah, then quickly withdrew it, remembering her blindness. "Miss Coleman, might I examine that instrument?" Ms. Fields looked uncertain, but Zariah nodded, carefully handing the violin to the curator. Dr. Whitmore held it reverently, turning it in his hands with expert precision. He lifted it to the light, examining the inner F-holes, then ran his fingers along the exact spot Zariah had indicated. "My word," he breathed. "It's authentic." He looked up, excitement transforming his scholarly features. "This is a Bell original. One of the 7 he crafted before his mysterious disappearance in 1980. We thought only 3 survived." A small crowd had gathered around them now, including several music critics and the event's primary donors. Sebastian's breathing had become shallow, his usual commanding presence diminished with each word from the curator. "The bell marking is his signature," Dr. Whitmore continued, voice rising with academic enthusiasm. "And the internal bracing pattern, entirely unique to Bell's work. But this particular instrument was thought lost forever. How did it end up here?" someone asked. All eyes turned to Sebastian, whose forced smile didn't reach his eyes. "An old family acquisition. Nothing particularly noteworthy." "Family acquisition?" Dr. Whitmore's eyebrows rose. "Interesting, considering your father, Richard Corwin, was Augustus Bell's final apprentice before Bell vanished." A murmur ran through the gathering crowd. Sebastian's jaw tightened visibly. "And even more interesting," Dr. Whitmore continued, warming to his subject, "is that this particular violin was the one Bell was working on just before he disappeared. The one that contained his revolutionary bracing design that your father later patented as his own invention. The silence that followed was deafening. A journalist who had been filming the exchange on her phone took a step closer. "Mr. Corwin," she called out, "would you care to comment on how your family acquired an instrument that apparently belonged to your father's missing mentor?" Sebastian's practiced smile cracked around the edges. "This is hardly the venue for such discussions. And the piece played tonight?" Dr. Whitmore pressed, turning back to Zariah. "Did you say it was Bell's composition?" Zariah nodded. "From his personal papers. Found in my school's archives. He donated instruments to music programs across the city before he disappeared. Papers that might prove prior art to the Corwin patents," Dr. Whitmore mused, too caught up in the historical implications to notice Sebastian's darkening expression. "The musical world has long suspected that Richard Corwin's sudden rise after Bell's disappearance wasn't coincidental, but there was never proof." Sebastian stepped forward, reclaiming his authoritative bearing through visible effort. "This event is about supporting music education, not indulging in baseless historical speculation. If you'll excuse me, we have a program to complete." But as he turned away, Zariah spoke again, her voice soft but carrying clearly in the hushed backstage area. "The violin remembers who made it," she said. "And the music remembers who wrote it." Sebastian froze mid-step, then continued walking without looking back, his shoulders rigid beneath his tailored jacket. The gala continued with mechanical precision, but the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. Sebastian performed his scheduled piece, a technically flawless Brahms concerto, to polite applause that paled against the thunderous ovation Zariah had received. Throughout his performance, phones glowed in the audience as attendees searched online for information about Augustus Bell. Backstage, in a small dressing room temporarily converted to a quiet space for student performers, Zariah sat with Ms. Fields and Dr. Whitmore. The Bell violin rested in a proper case the curator had hurriedly borrowed from a colleague. "I still don't understand," Ms. Fields said, her voice hushed. "How did you know that piece? We'd been practicing the Vivaldi for weeks." Zariah's fingers traced patterns on her knee. "I found the sheet music among grandfather's papers. It was in Braille. He transcribed it himself. The notes said it was the last piece he composed before." She paused. "Before he vanished." Dr. Whitmore leaned forward, academic excitement barely contained. "Augustus Bell transcribed his own work into Braille? Was there anyone in his family who was visually impaired?" "My grandmother," Zariah replied. "She played violin too, but lost her sight to an illness in her 20s. Grandfather taught her to feel the music instead of reading it. That's what the letter said." The curator made rapid notes on his phone. "This changes our entire understanding of Bell's work. His innovations weren't just technical, they were designed for accessibility. That explains the unique ergonomics of his instruments." The door opened abruptly. Sebastian stood in the threshold, his composure restored but eyes cold. Behind him stood a stern-looking man in an expensive suit. "Dr. Whitmore," Sebastian said with careful politeness, "my attorney advises me that the violin should be secured until proper ownership can be established." Ms. Fields stood, placing herself between Sebastian and Zariah. "The ownership seems quite clear from what we've heard tonight." The attorney stepped forward. "Legally, the instrument has been in the Corwin family's possession for over 40 years. Miss Coleman's claim, while interesting, would require substantial documentation." Dr. Whitmore bristled. "The violin bears Bell's maker's mark. And if these Braille manuscripts exist, precisely why everything should be properly catalogued and authenticated," Sebastian interrupted smoothly. "As a museum curator, surely you appreciate proper protocols." The atmosphere crackled with tension. A young woman appeared in the doorway behind Sebastian, her press badge visible. "Mr. Corwin," she called. "Eliza Chin, New York Arts Journal. Would you comment on the videos circulating online of your attempt to humiliate Miss Coleman with a defective instrument?" Sebastian turned sharply. "What video? It's been shared over 10,000 times in the past hour." The reporter continued, holding up her phone. "The sound system broadcast your comments quite clearly. Sebastian's carefully reconstructed facade cracked. The attorney placed a warning hand on his arm. "No comment at this time," the lawyer stated firmly. From down the hall came the event coordinator's voice, increasingly frantic. "Mr. Corwin! The major donors are requesting Miss Coleman join them for the reception. And there are 3 more reporters asking for statements about Augustus Bell." Zariah stood, her movement drawing all eyes. With quiet dignity, she reached for the violin case. "This instrument belongs in a museum, where everyone can learn its story. Not locked away in anyone's private collection." Dr. Whitmore nodded enthusiastically. "The Metropolitan would be honored to feature it in a special exhibition about Bell's work and legacy. With proper credit to you, of course." Sebastian's attorney began to object, but was interrupted by a new arrival, an elegant older woman who moved with deliberate purpose through the crowded doorway. "I believe I can provide the documentation you're seeking," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of authority despite its softness. Ms. Fields gasped. "Superintendent Lockhart! I didn't know you were attending." "I wasn't planning to," the school's superintendent replied, her eyes fixed on Sebastian. "But when our archives department called about a developing situation involving one of our students, I came immediately." She held up a leather portfolio. "These papers were found during our recent digitization project. Letters, designs, and compositions by Augustus Bell, including his will, leaving his instruments and works to the city's school music programs." Sebastian's face had gone completely rigid. "Those documents could be forgeries." "Possibly," Superintendent Lockhart agreed. "Which is why I've already arranged for authentication experts to examine them tomorrow. Along with this." She removed a sealed envelope. "A letter from your father to Augustus Bell, dated 3 days before Bell's disappearance, demanding partnership in his patents." The silence that followed was broken by the click of multiple camera phones. The gathered crowd had grown, drawn by the unfolding drama. Sebastian's attorney whispered urgently in his ear. Whatever strategy they'd planned was disintegrating by the second. "I had nothing to do with my father's business dealings," Sebastian said stiffly. "And I certainly had no knowledge of any historical significance of that old violin. Yet you specifically selected it to humiliate a child," Ms. Fields said, her voice carrying clear moral authority. "A child who happens to be Bell's granddaughter." The last statement sent a fresh wave of murmurs through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Poetic justice." Sebastian looked frantically from face to face, finding no allies. His carefully cultivated image was collapsing in real time, replaced by something far less flattering. Zariah stepped forward, her hand finding the superintendent's arm with unerring accuracy. "May I play one more piece from my grandfather's collection? For everyone here?" Superintendent Lockhart smiled. "I think that would be entirely appropriate." As Zariah carefully removed the violin from its case, Sebastian and his attorney retreated from the doorway, pursued by persistent reporters with increasingly uncomfortable questions. The haunting melody that soon filled the backstage area drew staff, performers, and donors alike into a reverent silence. It was the sound of something long buried finally finding its way into the light, a truth that could no longer be contained. By the following morning, #ViolinGirl and #BellLegacy were trending nationwide. Clips of Zariah's performance had been viewed millions of times, often juxtaposed with Sebastian's hot mic comments. Major news networks ran segments with headlines like, "Blind Prodigy Exposes Classical Music Scandal," and "Lost Musical Genius Rediscovered Through Granddaughter's Performance." In her modest apartment in the Bronx, Zariah sat with her mother, Melody Coleman, as they scrolled through interview requests on a specialized screen reader. "NPR, CBS Morning, even The Tonight Show," Melody said, her voice a mixture of pride and disbelief. "This is overwhelming." Zariah's fingers moved across the braille display connected to her laptop. "There are music historians writing about grandfather. They're calling him the forgotten innovator and a visionary silenced too soon." Melody sighed, reaching for her daughter's hand. "I wish I'd told you more about him. After he disappeared, it was just too painful for my mother. She believed something terrible had happened, But no one would listen. The doorbell rang. Ms. Fields entered with Dr. Whitmore and a woman in a tailored suit who introduced herself as Regina Washington, Arts Education Director for the New York Department of Education. The authentication experts have confirmed everything, Dr. Whitmore announced without preamble, his academic reserve overwhelmed by excitement. The Braille manuscripts, the violin, even those threatening letters from Richard Corwin, all genuine. Ms. Washington nodded. The department is establishing a special commission to review Augustus Bell's contributions to music education. His designs for adaptive instruments were decades ahead of their time. Meanwhile, across town in his penthouse apartment, Sebastian Corwin stared at his ringing phone, his fifth manager in 12 hours trying to reach him. On the television, muted but impossible to ignore, financial news scrolled beneath his own grim face. Corwin Instruments stock plummets amid historical fraud allegations. His publicist had already quit. 2 prestigious conservatories had withdrawn invitations for master classes. His social media accounts were flooded with outrage, not just about the apparent historical theft of Bell's work, but about his cruel treatment of a child performer. Sebastian's phone buzzed with a text from his attorney. Settlement offer from Metropolitan Museum. They want the remaining Bell instruments and documents in your father's collection. Generous terms. Strongly advise accepting. He threw the phone across the room. At the Metropolitan Museum that afternoon, Dr. Whitmore guided Zariah through a special storage area where musical instruments awaited conservation. Feel this, he invited, placing her hands on a violin similar to the one she played. This is another Bell original. Note the subtle differences in the fingerboard curvature, designed for players with smaller hands. Zariah explored the instrument carefully. It feels familiar somehow. Your grandfather created instruments that could be played by anyone, regardless of physical differences or limitations, Dr. Whitmore explained. He believed music belonged to everyone. The Corwin Company took those innovations and marketed them exclusively to the elite. A week later, Zariah appeared on national public radios. All things considered. The host's voice was gentle but direct. You've become the face of a movement to recognize overlooked contributions to classical music. How does that feel at 13? I just played what I felt in the violin, Zariah replied. But I'm glad people are learning about my grandfather. He wrote in his journals that music should be accessible to everyone, not just those born into privilege or the right institutions. The interview was heard by Elena Vasquez, director of the prestigious Eastman School of Music, who immediately contacted Ms. Fields. We'd like to invite Zariah to perform with our orchestra next month. And we're establishing the Augustus Bell Scholarship for musicians from underrepresented backgrounds. As Bell's story spread, more revelations followed. 3 retired luthiers came forward, describing how Richard Corwin had threatened them when they questioned his sudden breakthroughs after Bell's disappearance. A police detective who had investigated Bell's case decades earlier admitted that inquiries had been shut down after pressure from influential people in the music world. The most dramatic development came from an unexpected source. Sebastian's mother, long divorced from Richard Corwin, released a statement through her attorney. I've donated all Bell instruments and documents in my possession to the Metropolitan Museum. I can no longer remain silent about the methods my ex-husband used to build his company on another man's genius. 30 days after the gala, the Augustus Bell Foundation was established with initial funding from anonymous donors, widely rumored to include several billionaires who had attended the fateful performance. The foundation's mission, to identify and support musical talent from underfunded schools while promoting innovations in accessible instrument design. Zariah was named as an honorary board member. The first major exhibition of Bell's work was scheduled for the fall at the Metropolitan Museum, with Zariah's performance of Lament of the Unheard to be featured in the accompanying documentary. During a planning meeting for the exhibition, Dr. Whitmore received an unexpected delivery, a small, unmarked package containing a journal. Inside, in faded ink, were Augustus Bell's final notations about his groundbreaking designs, along with a note in modern handwriting. This belongs with his legacy, not mine. SC. As for Sebastian, he released a terse apology video that was widely criticized as insufficient before retreating from public view. His concert bookings evaporated. Industry insiders reported he had sold his Manhattan penthouse and moved to a remote property in Vermont. The narrative had been irrevocably rewritten, not through litigation or official channels, but through the undeniable power of a 13-year-old girl's performance, and the truth it had inadvertently revealed. 1 year to the day after the Bridging Harmony Gala, Carnegie Hall glowed with anticipation. Every seat was filled. The crowd was different from typical classical concerts. Music students from public schools across the city sat alongside celebrities, critics, and industry leaders. Reporters from major outlets lined the back wall. The poster outside read, "Echoes of the Unheard, the Augustus Bell Legacy Concert featuring Zariah Coleman and the New York Youth Symphony." Backstage, 14-year-old Zariah ran her fingers over the violin in her hands. Not her grandfather's original, which now resided in a climate-controlled display at the Metropolitan Museum, but a perfect replica created using Bell's recently discovered designs. The luthier who crafted it had worked with Zariah directly, incorporating subtle modifications based on her feedback about how the instrument felt and resonated against her body. 5 minutes, Zariah, Ms. Fields said, her voice filled with quiet pride. In the past year, the teacher had turned down 3 offers from prestigious conservatories, choosing instead to lead the new adaptive music program funded by the Bell Foundation. "Is my mother here?" Zariah asked, adjusting her deep purple concert dress, a far cry from the simple black one she'd worn a year ago. "Front row, center," Ms. Fields confirmed. "Along with Dr. Whitmore and the superintendent." Zariah nodded, her composure remarkable for her age. The year had transformed her, not just in the confidence with which she now moved, but in the deliberate way she had embraced her role as both musician and advocate. She had testified before congressional committees on arts funding, consulted on adaptive instrument design, and performed at the White House. Yet she remained, at heart, a teenager who loved music above all else. The stage manager approached with an unexpected message. "There's someone asking to see you before the performance. He says it's important." Zariah tilted her head questioningly. "It's Sebastian Corwin," the manager added hesitantly. The backstage area went silent. Sebastian had all but disappeared from public life. His former supporters had abandoned him, his father's company had been sold and rebranded, and the Corwin name had become synonymous with artistic theft. "Send him in," Zariah said after a moment's consideration. Ms. Fields moved protectively closer as Sebastian entered. He looked different, thinner, less polished, his designer clothes replaced by a simple suit. The arrogance had drained from his posture. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, his voice lacking its former resonance. "I wanted to give you something before tonight's performance." He held out a small wooden box. Zariah didn't reach for it. "What is it?" "My father's papers. The ones he kept private. They detail exactly what happened to your grandfather." Sebastian's voice faltered. "I found them after my father's death last month. Things you deserve to know." The silence stretched between them. Finally, Zariah extended her hand. "Thank you for bringing these forward." Sebastian placed the box in her hands, then added awkwardly, "I'll be in the audience tonight. In the back. I've been relearning how to listen." After he left, Ms. Fields examined the box's contents, yellowed pages that appeared to be a confession. "We'll have these reviewed properly after the concert," she said, setting the box aside. Minutes later, Zariah stepped onto the Carnegie Hall stage to thunderous applause. The New York Youth Symphony, comprising talented students from across the city's diverse neighborhoods, rose in respect. Unlike traditional orchestras, this one featured several musicians with disabilities using modified instruments based on Bell's designs. The conductor, a renowned maestro who had championed the Bell revival, gestured for silence. "Tonight we present the world premiere of Augustus Bell's recently discovered Final Symphony, Resonance in Light, completed by his granddaughter, Zariah Coleman." The audience erupted again. Music critics leaned forward in anticipation, The discovery of Bell's unfinished symphony had been major news in classical circles, but tonight would be its first public performance. Zoraya raised her violin. The hall fell silent. In that moment of perfect stillness, she sensed rather than saw the presence of her audience, from her mother in the front row to Sebastian Corwin in the back, from young students attending their first classical concert to distinguished composers witnessing history. Her bow touched the strings, and the first notes emerged, clear, confident, and hauntingly beautiful. The orchestra joined, bringing to life Bell's innovative compositions that seamlessly blended classical traditions with elements that felt startlingly modern even 40 years after their creation. In the rear of the hall, Sebastian Corwin closed his eyes. His face reflected a complex mixture of emotions, regret, certainly, but also something unexpected, relief. The truth had finally been released, like music too powerful to remain unplayed. The symphony built to its climax, the section Zoraya had completed based on her grandfather's sketches. Her contribution honored his style while introducing her own distinctive voice, creating not just a bridge between past and present, but a path toward the future. As the final notes faded, there was a beat of profound silence, that magical moment when an audience collectively holds its breath, suspended between experience and response. Then Carnegie Hall exploded with sound as the audience rose in a unanimous standing ovation. Flowers rained onto the stage. Zoraya stood at the center, violin held high, a young artist who had not just reclaimed a stolen legacy but transformed it into something entirely new. The conductor gestured for her to take a solo bow. As Zoraya did, the spotlight caught the subtle gleam of tears on her cheeks, not tears of sadness, but of completion. Of justice served and talent recognized. Of music that would never again go unheard.